So we will start with our first presenter, Tyler Ferrell, who is the only person in the world named to Golf Digest's list of best young teachers in America and its list of best golf fitness professionals in America. He's a golf instructor and also an expert in biomechanics. He has unique ability to communicate how your body works in the golf swing and how both can work together better. If you're tired of piecing together random tips, you finally want to understand how everything fits together, then Tyler Ferrell is the right coach for you. So then without any further ado, let's launch the presentation by Tyler Ferrell that he has prepared. And after that, Tyler will join us for a short Q&A. So write down any questions that you have. So we're launching the presentation now.
Hello golfers, and welcome to the HackMotion Swing Analysis Guide here presented by me, Tyler Ferrell, in Golf Smart Academy. So in this series, I'm going to show you how to get started with the data. So I'm going to assume you already know how to set it up, how to collect the data, and you have a bunch of swings, but you're not sure how to interpret them. So we're going to dig a little deeper into how to analyze your swing and how you can use HackMotion to speed up that process. So when you're analyzing your swing with HackMotion, there's lots of different approaches. I'm not saying that mine is the best, but this is the one that works really well for me. I tend to analyze from setup first on a big general scale, just making sure that you're not kind of horribly out of positions, and then looking at impact. Ultimately, the golf ball is going to fly based on the interaction between the golf club and the golf ball. So we need to get the golf club to strike the golf ball differently, or we need the golf club to move in a way that gives us more consistency in how we strike the golf ball. Once we decide what we need to change about the golf club, then we want to look at the body. And so we're going to look at the body both in terms of how the body's moving, but also how the arms and the hands are moving. So the HackMotion is great for looking very quickly and very accurately at how the lead wrist is looking. In this program, we're going to focus on the lead wrist. We may do another one for the trail wrist, but this is all about the lead wrist. We're going to start at impact and then work our way backwards. So we'll go from impact. If impact is off, we're going to look at the top of the swing to see if that's largely off or contributing to what's going on at impact. If that's okay, then we're going to look at the downswing. We'll break it down into the transition or the release. Oftentimes, what your wrist is doing is a result or a complement to what your body is doing during the downswing. And if those are okay, or let's say we're trying to work on those, but we're still kind of fighting it, having some trouble, then we're going to look at the backswing. We'll break the backswing into the takeaway and setting the club at the top. So in this program, you'll see some sections below where we're going to cover each of these major sections, whether it's the setup, the impact, top of swing position, the downswing, or looking at your backswing. Okay, for setup, from the body perspective, we're just gonna, I'll have some videos to help you with kind of your body position. You might have to use some video to complement the data that you're getting from the HackMotion. The HackMotion is gonna help you standardize as well as get more consistent with your grip. So when we're looking at the lead wrist, the main parameter that we're going to be looking at is the amount of extension or flexion in that wrist. But for most people, it's going to be a little bit of extension. John Rahm's fairly flat. We can see a little bit more extension here with Justin Thomas. From the posture, we want to be relatively balanced over our feet. We want to be kind of hinging from the hips and have our spine in a good position to rotate and extend. And we want to have the arms and shoulders connected, but also not in a case of or a state of extreme tension. So they're hanging a little bit with good alignment in the direction that we want to swing. So these are some rough guides, but we'll have some other videos in the setup section. When we're looking at this extension parameter, here's kind of a spectrum. This golfer here has a lot more extension in the wrist, a little bit of an extension, and then virtually none. So I'm not here to say that one is better than the other. I have a video to help you understand how the key is matching up how your grip matches to your sternum or your body position. Basically, what's going to happen is when you swing a golf club, your hand's going to fling away from you and it's going to err towards getting into a neutral lineup. Whether it's this way or this way kind of depends a little bit more on the shoulder and some of the forearm rotation, but it's going to tend to want to snap into more neutral alignment as the forces of the club are pulling on it. So what happens is the more that you grip your hand on the underneath or on the side, kind of over this way, the more that the wrist is going to be an extension, and when it snaps towards neutral, you can see that that closes the face, and that hits the ball low and far, and we call that more of a strong grip. If the grip is more on top, or more kind of this way, where it's more on the left side, then as it approaches that neutral position, you can see the club face is pointing more to the right compared to when it was on the side or underneath. And so when it's more on top, we call that a weaker grip. It tends to hit the ball a little bit higher, and it requires some different matchups in order to square the club. So I'm not going to say that you have to have one perfect, but as a rough kind of general guide, somewhere in the 10 to 25 degree range is probably the window for neutral. Less than that would be more considered a weak grip, and then stronger than that would be definitely considered a strong grip. 25 I might even consider a strong grip. But the actual number is not as important as the consistency of the number. We'll talk about that in the next slide. The other thing to factor in is you can see that these golfers have a similar amount of extension, but because of the body positions, one golfer being more behind, that will actually create a little bit more arm rotation, which will strengthen the grip. So we can't just go off of that number and determine if it's a strong, weak, or neutral grip, but it gives us a really good indication, especially if we're using some face-on video to match it up. Like I said, the bigger goal is trying to get some grip strength consistency. So this particular golfer, you can see in their course of 11 different swings, it went from basically flat at -1 to -12. So changing 10 or 11 degrees is probably a little bit too much. Now, it's possible that this golfer was working on the grip, in which case, okay, good job, you were changing your grip pattern. But if you're trying to be more consistent, the HackMotion will help you zero in or know kind of how far away from having a repeatable, consistent grip you're having each time. So goal is consistency somewhere in that neutral range. So I've got the video on matching where is this body position with the general position of the grip. But as a rough guide, we're going to say that at impact, our big goal is to be 15 to 30 degrees more flexed than wherever we started. So if we start with, let's say, as an example, if we start with 15 degrees, kind of like this, then at impact, we would want to be anywhere from 0 to 15 flexed. If you started with more 45, then you would want to be somewhere in the 30 degrees extended to 15 degree extended range. So one of them would look kind of like this at setup, and you can see as I move my hands forward, I'm going to lose some of the extension. So that's one of the big reasons why we tend to see this pattern with Tour Pros, is because you can see in both cases the arms are going to be, or the handle is going to be more forward of the golf ball than where it was at setup, and the simple act of getting it more forward requires that the wrist get into a little bit more flexed position than where it started, unless you have a super strong grip, in which case you could get it forward with a little bit more ulnar deviation, but that's only in extreme cases. For most people, our goal is to get to this impact position where we basically have a flat left wrist. Because we're assuming that we have more of a normal grip, and just for comparison, you can see this collage where we're going to look at a bunch of different golfers here, all from John Michael Field's YouTube channel. If you're looking for good camera angles, good swings, he does a great job. So here we've got more flat left wrist, a little bit more extended here. That's why I'm saying it's not an absolute that it has to be perfectly flat. It just has to be more flexed or less extended than where it was at setup. Okay, so the way that that shows up on video is that flat left wrist. The way that you can quickly look at it on HackMotion is looking at where the flexion extension line is crossing the impact line compared to where it's set up. So you can see that shape-wise, these are somewhat similar, but this pattern here, we're crossing impact down here. This is 20 degrees less than where it was at setup. Over here, you can see it's crossing here. This is about 5 or 10 degrees more extended than where it was at setup. So even though the pattern or the shape looks pretty good, the value of when it's crossing tells you that the timing and the way that these golfers are using their wrists is different. In fact, this one over here is this swing here that I was making to try to get more extended, and you can see how scoopy or flippy that looks like. So if we are starting with the premise that we want to have a good impact position, this is the first thing that we want to look at is where is the wrist position at impact? And in general, if you're struggling at impact with this lead wrist position, it's going to tend to be too extended. It's rare that it's going to be too flexed. So that too extended position, we're going to call flipping at impact. Now, too much extension at impact, which we call flipping, could come from two different scenarios. In this case, the two different scenarios would be you got into enough flexion at some point in the downswing, but then you just lost it. So if our goal is to be 15 to 30 degrees less extended than where we were at setup, here you can see this golfer started at plus 20 and they got to slightly below 0 here in transition. So they flexed it enough, but then you can see impact was basically the same at setup. So even though they flexed it enough in transition, they had a tendency to kind of stall and flip and let that angle out. The other option would be if you just never got enough flexion. Some people will tend to have a lot of grip pressure, and if you keep that grip pressure and the wrist doesn't move, then the wrist will stay extended for the majority of the swing. So this golfer, we'll call them not having any or not having enough flexion in downswing. So they never got into that 15 to 30 increased wrist flexion category. Here's where they started at somewhere around plus 8, and then we can see at their peak they only got down to 0. So they only flexed it a few degrees, or compared to where they were at setup. Here's another case where again maybe flexing 10 degrees or so, and so at impact they're more extended than we want because they never got enough of this extension. So that's going to be one of the root causes of flipping, and this is going to be one of the most important parameters that you're going to be checking when you're using the HackMotion system. Now, unfortunately, just because you try to flex the wrist doesn't mean it's automatically going to happen. So if you're flipping at impact and you don't have enough flexion there, that's one of our big causes for intervention. That's one of the things that's going to give us a lot more consistency and quality and compression. So if you're flipping at impact, what are we going to do about it? Okay, I have a little test for you, which is called a 9 to 3 test, which is basically you're going to go out the next session and you're going to see if you can get more flexion if you do a little half swing. If you do a half swing, we're taking away some of the timing and some of the movements of the backswing. So we're really looking to answer the question, could you make contact? In a perfect scenario, could you make good contact with more flexion on a shorter, slower swing? If you're able to do it on a slower, shorter swing like that, so if you're able to do it on the 9 to 3, but you still can't do it on the full swing, then it tells us it's more likely what you're doing in the backswing or how you're creating speed in the downswing. But if you can't do it on the 9 to 3, then it's more likely telling us that your brain just doesn't quite know how to deliver the club with the proper wrist position. And so we're going to do more release training. Now, you're welcome to do release training even if you pass the test, and you're welcome to work on the top of the swing even if you can do it. But this just gives you a starting point as far as how to classify what will improve your impact position the fastest. So you'll see that on the right in the category of videos, we have impact drills first, and then we have some release drills, and then we have some top of the swing and transition drills that you can go through to pinpoint the one or two drills that will help you change the graph the fastest. So release or top of the swing / transition. So if it's a release issue, our drills in this section or in the release section are going to focus on the body position at impact. So we already said the body position and the arm position have to match in order for it to work out. And then we'll work on the arm education. The other component to this is where are you creating your speed? So hitting it more with your body and less with your hands will typically help get that wrist to be in a little bit more flexed position as well. So we got a couple big buckets: body position, arm education, and kind of tempo, hitting it with the body. If we're doing okay with that, but we're still breaking down when we do the bigger swing, which is very common, a lot of you are going to be in that category, then we have to look at the backswing and transition issue. In transition, simply from the graph, we have to look at, are we getting enough flexion? But as far as kind of complementary pieces, we want to look at, are we putting ourselves in position at the top of the swing where we're too extended, or where we're powering it more from our arms and not enough from the body. Now, one other category that we'll look at in the backswing is an inside takeaway. What can happen when you do too much of an inside takeaway is you run out of rotational room, and then your backswing gets very lifty late, and when it gets lifty, you're going to tend to have more of a vertical pull of the club, and that vertical pull of the club is going to tend to mess up the wrist movements. We want to get a little bit more general width, and we want to get a little bit more hitting it with the body in order to get that wrist in that really good tour impact position. So if we're circling back to the top of the swing goals, we've got avoiding being too extended at the top of the swing. So the general goal is wherever you were at setup to be about +5 to -10. So basically 5 degrees more flexed or 10 degrees, 5 degrees more extended or 10 degrees more flexed at the top, but basically being at about the same position. If the wrist is in about the same position, then that usually means that I've created the backswing more by using my body and kind of finishing and making a really good turn or pivot. In addition, what will usually happen is I'll be able to maintain some of the width. That's one of the trademarks you'll see with really good golf swings. If my body doesn't turn and I just use my arms, then the arms will lift. Right arm kind of, or the trail arm kind of gets more into this flying elbow position, and the lead wrist gets more into that extended position as it picks up. And that's going to tend to encourage you to get a little bit more choppy or vertical on the way down. But the quick way we can look at it on the graph is by looking if we've been too extended at the top, so here you can see where I set up, the top of the swing is kind of in a close bandwidth to where I set up. Where here you can see the top of the swing is way up above it. That would be a really exaggerated extension movement. So the great thing about the graph is you can kind of get a time or a snapshot of the entire swing all at once, which is harder to do on video. So that's one of the reasons I love 3D. You can see the whole swing at once, and you can see which area is most likely causing the other dominoes to be out of whack. Okay, so within range, it's pretty close to the same. Out of range, it's going to be dramatically above. Now, I will point out on here, some golfers do extend, say a Fred Couples or Bernhard Langer or Henrik Stenson, are some who have a little bit more extension at the top. But getting a little bit more flat wrist or even bowed is the kind of the typical pattern that sets up for more of a body rotation downswing. Now, one thing that the app will trigger is if you have a weaker grip on a certain percentage of your swings, then oftentimes you're going to be more likely to get into this extended position at the top. So it's just going to recommend that you take a look at your grip. Now remember I said as long as your grip is consistent and you're moving it into an appropriate position to match what your body is doing, that's probably okay. But if you have a weak grip and a flip and a slice, it's definitely something I would consider working on. Okay, so we've got the top of the swing kind of figured out. Let's talk a little bit about some takeaway problems that could contribute to the top of the swing issue. And basically the takeaway problems are going to be largely using your arms too much and your body not enough. So if I'm using my arms too much, it will typically show up in one of two exaggeratedly different patterns. One would be adding extension. So you've probably seen that most of these graphs have more flexion going on the early part of the takeaway and then extension during the second half. And that's because when you hinge your wrist and set your wrist, it tends to want to extend. Well, some golfers will extend right away, and that tends to show up as very much an armsy, lifting type motion. But on the graph, it'll show up like this, where it's going positive right away. It's usually accompanied by an arm lift, and occasionally it can be accompanied with an arm roll, which makes the club too inside. But I would say the more common cause of too inside would be either getting a lot of arm rotation, or even more common would be going into that flexion movement too soon, especially while having an upper body sway or having your upper body stay in flexion or stay bent over. So if it goes kind of like this, the wrist is going to flex and it's going to take the club way inside. And then what will happen is you've kind of used all your around components, and so then the second half of the backswing is typically going to be very vertical and very lifty, and it's going to encourage you to then come steeper over the top on the way down. That's the danger of too much inside. If you don't do that, if you do come inside and then find a way to still use your body, it can be an okay pattern, but oftentimes it will give you some problem on either wedge play or like half shots. So something to consider when you're analyzing your swing. An additional component would be having too much wrist hinge in the backswing. So the lead wrist doesn't actually hinge that much. Because the right hand or the trail hand is on a little differently, it'll tend to have a little more extension during the backswing. But the lead wrist is only going to extend, I would have said more in the 15 to 20 degree category, but the HackMotion data shows more than 35 degrees is kind of excessive. It depends a little bit on your grip setup, but more vertical wrist extension is also going to be associated with extension of the wrist, or wrist hinge is going to be associated with extension of the wrist. So oftentimes what will happen is this golfer will under rotate, get pretty steep here, and then if I were to rotate my body, you could see that would be very vertical. So this will tend to accompany more of stand up and kind of a throw or a cast pattern. But the important thing here is to get good at kind of identifying some of these key benchmarks. So is the top of the swing roughly at the same position where it was at setup, even if it has a little bit of this movement? Do I then flex enough during the downswing, and am I still flexed somewhere at impact? If I'm struggling with one of those components and I try to directly fix it, then I need to look at some of the indirect fixes, which would be looking at some complementary video to see if my body is causing me to have some of these issues. And that's how to use the arms as well as how to relate the body is what we have in these different sections here in this HackMotion analysis course. So one last pattern is in transition. In transition, most of the problems are going to show up on video as kind of like a body pattern of either spinning the shoulders too soon or pulling with the arms, hanging back, some of those things. But the one that will show up the most on the HackMotion sensor is getting extended in transition or not flexing enough in transition. So here you can see this vertical line is the top of the swing, and you'll see it continue to go upward after the vertical line. That basically means that during that first phase of transition, this wrist is going more like this, and that's often accompanied with a big arm pull, pulling the club in, and then it will almost always accompany more of a flipping down at the bottom. So I call that pattern steep early, shallow late, and it's one of the biggest causes of a two-way miss and a lot of inconsistency. So we got a video that can help you understand the body components of that, but it shows up on video looking just like that, where it's, it shows up on the graph like that, where it's going up, following the top of the swing. Okay, so the general plan attack, we're gonna start at impact and then work into the 9-3 or full swing, so we can figure out, is it more of a release issue or is it more of a top of backswing / power / pivot issue? If we go directly, like maybe I just didn't know what I need to do with my wrist, but if you try it, like let's say you said, okay, I need to be more flexed at impact, and you try it and the graph just isn't changing, then you want to use some complementary video in order to see why the body position might be fighting what the wrist is trying to do. But then you can use the wrist as the primary source of feedback. So as you're working on your body, you should be able to see some of those wrist graphs change. So that's going to be our general pattern of starting at impact and working backward. In the other sections, we'll have more details into the drills that will help either improve the wrist mechanics, the body mechanics, or help you understand the patterns even deeper.
Okay, I think that was an excellent presentation by Tyler. So Tyler has joined today also us for a short Q&A section. Tyler, you're welcome to join as well. Turn the camera and the microphone on.
So hopefully you can hear me. When I click on start video, it says you can't start your video because the host has stopped it.
Okay, I will check what could be wrong with it.
But I can answer, I see there's a bunch of questions that came in the chat.
Maybe you can try it another time to turn on the video now.
There we go. That looks like it's coming.
Okay, great. Okay, hey, great to see you.
Standard hotel room backdrop, right?
Yeah. So today, we have a couple questions that came in.
Yeah.
So I think let's focus on some that are more practical. So one is about explaining how to do matchups of pronation, supination, and the grip. So rotation of the handle then and the grip strength.
Yeah. So one of the tricky things is kind of getting on the same page as far as pronation, supination versus as it relates to the anatomy movements versus what the HackMotion sensor is going to present. So the HackMotion sensor is going to present kind of the global orientation. So if I was to pin my elbow so this doesn't move, this would be pronation and it would show up as pronation on the HackMotion sensor. But if I let my elbow move with my arm, this would also show up as pronation, but really it was more internal rotation. So typically, the stronger the grip, the more that you're going to see a little bit more of an internal rotation with this shoulder, or the elbow kind of pointing more in the general direction of the target. So you'll tend to see a little bit more pronated setup position. And then as you're coming through, you'll tend to see a later and probably a little bit decreased amount of supination on the way through compared to if you have a weaker grip and the forearm gets pointing more in the direction of the target.
Okay, so stronger grips would have less of the supination.
Typically, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now, anatomically, I'd say the supination of the forearm is very similar, but the global position is going to make it show up so that it's a lot less.
Okay. Then we have a question from Jonathan. Do you have a target number for flexion at P6?
I would tend to say using the impact intervals, you probably want to be a little bit more than where you're going to be at impact. So if your goal is to get around, let's say 15 to 30 degrees, probably somewhere in the 20 to 40 more flex than where you were at setup.
Okay. Okay. Great. Then there's a very practical question from a gentleman whose handicap has gone up over the last months, and he's really struggling with turning his hips more in the backswing, and he's asking
Okay.
for the best drill to use to get to turn the hips more in the backswing.
Okay. So there's two things there. One, I would usually start with trying to identify or figure out why the handicap has gone up. Has the handicap gone up because of either quality of ball striking, so solidness of contact, ability to hit the ball or control direction or distance control. Assuming that we want to get more hip turn in the backswing, that would either create more depth to help with the path. It could create more sequencing to help with maybe avoiding a little bit of an arm pull. So there's a couple of good reasons, but I would usually start with like the outcome goal of how are we going to measure that turning more in the hips is helping? Is it going to help contact or is it going to help direction or speed? But as far as the hip rotation, one of my favorite ones is just feeling more of a body pivot where if you were to put a club across your shoulders and you were to make a pivot where basically the shoulder was pointing in the general direction of the golf ball, what you'll feel is probably more rotation of the hips and more rotation of the shoulders. Now, what I would say is typically golfers who don't rotate the hips in the backswing, if you free it up and you're trying to rotate your hips, but you're having a hard time doing it, I would usually look at making sure that the rib cage, especially the bottom of the rib cage, is rotating. So oftentimes, if I'm pulling my arms behind my body, then my rib cage won't rotate very much. So feeling like this area, the bottom of the rib cage, is actually rotating more than the arm is pulling. You can see when I do that, I get some good rotation of the hips and the pelvis. And the other place to look is at the neck. So some people, if you're really restricted in your neck range of motion, then if you did turn your hips and your head and your neck didn't rotate, you have a hard time seeing the golf ball. So this little pivot drill will help you feel the rib cage rotate and the neck rotate, and those two are usually bigger barriers to rotating the pelvis rather than just kind of a feel of certain muscles.
Okay, okay, excellent, excellent answer. There's so many questions coming in that I know that we won't manage all of them, but I'll try to pick some that could be really relevant to specifically what you spoke about. So one is about what is your opinion on setting the lead wrist at setup? So I assume that
So basically,
is impact
yeah,
setup, yeah.
yeah, so I would say I do have probably, I don't know, maybe three golfers who are kind of in that 20 handicap range where it's way more simple for them to just take a setup and then put the left wrist in flexion. Now, I've got when I travel, I'll usually use a spatula as the golf club. So you'll see when I flatten that left wrist, I'm going to close the club face. So they will be setting up with the club face pointing left of the fairway, but then that allows them to turn and get into that position and it doesn't slice. So I am fine with it. It can potentially create some issues in the backswing, but it doesn't always. So it can be a simple approach for people who would rather just kind of like set it and forget it rather than have to feel the movement of getting there.
Okay. And then Dennis is asking, is there a graph pattern that shows the over the top move?
Unfortunately, the supination pronation is probably going to have the best indication, and you might see like indirectly a little bit of wrist extension. But typically the over the top move is caused more from the shoulder blades. It's basically caused from you get up to the top of the swing and then either this left shoulder starts really pulling behind, almost like I was doing a row, or that right shoulder starts pushing on top, almost like I was arm wrestling and I was kind of really slamming or winning. Those are the two big causes of over the top. So you will sometimes see that show up in as I go this way, the wrist, if I do it from the down the line, as I go that way, the wrist will naturally want to go into a little bit of extension. But mostly that over the top is more of a body sequencing with a little bit of arm shelling that happens more or less naturally if you're powering transition from your body.
Okay. And then there's a question from Mark. Could you also discuss ulnar radial deviation in conjunction with flexion extension, specifically impact and follow through?
Yes, it's a little bit tricky because down at impact you'll see, you know, kind of some noise, right? But in general, the flexion and ulnar deviation kind of complement each other. And the ulnar deviation is typically going to want to start somewhere around shaft 45, kind of in this zone here. So right around here, you've already got some flexion, and it's now starting to go into that ulnar deviation as we're turning, and it's going to reach its maximum ulnar deviation somewhere between impact and shaft parallel. So somewhere kind of in this zone is where it's going to reach its maximum before it starts rehinging. The big thing I'd be looking for is if you tend to kind of pull down and kind of almost increase that radial deviation, or you start losing it too soon, that's going to be more associated with kind of a flip roll pattern. That'll be more associated with like diggy divots and pull misses. So the ulnar deviation has a big impact on arc width and consistency. So it has a big impact on helping to prevent the pull miss as well.
Okay. And then one player is asking a very specific question about if he's aiming for a flat wrist at the top, like Tiger or Tommy Fleetwood, what should be the settings at the top of the swing and at impact?
The settings, so if you're trying to get like truly flat, then you would probably want it to be set, I would say, 5 degrees extended to about 10 degrees flexed. If you put the setting for the top of the swing there, that'll give you enough.
I think here's an important point that a lot of, when you look at the camera, you actually don't see the extension precisely. So guys, often when you look at, let's say, Tommy Fleetwood, then they actually will have more extension, but it would be hidden. It would look flat from this angle down, kind of down the line. But when you actually look from here, there's a bit of extension and angle when you make the.
Yeah, because you're not looking like dead in the plane like this.
Yeah,
they've actually gone a little bit past. They'll have somewhere, you know, 10 degrees of extension. But if you really wanted a flat left wrist, I'd usually give you, you know, 15 degree range or something like that. But the more important thing is that it's slightly more flexed than where it was at setup. I think that kind of starts you getting in the right position.
Okay. All right. A lot more questions coming in. Have to check out if there's any more that we can quickly manage.
I
maybe some drills about ulnar deviation with impact.
Well, one of my favorite things to do is to do a simple push ball drill as an impact fix drill. So oftentimes, if you just kind of get into your setup position and then you were to go to impact, by moving the hands forward, they actually move slightly forward and slightly up to help get the club more in line with the club, or sorry, with the forearm. So as I get to that position, I'll have a little bit of shaft lean and the club face will be a little bit closed. And so then I'll be able to feel compression on the ball just by going from there to a follow through position. And what you'll find is if you try to bring it through by rehinging or going into radial deviation and kind of bringing it across like this, then what will happen is the ball will just slide up the face and it won't go anywhere. But if you maintain that ulnar deviation with a little bit of flexion and get a little bit of supination, but really a lot of body rotation, then the ball will kind of stick to the face and you'll be able to throw it maybe 10 or 15 yards down the fairway. And so it gives you more of a sense of kind of calmness or stability through impact rather than kind of a quick, rapid change or flip.
Okay, so that was, I think, excellent quick Q&A section. We have a lot of more questions coming in, but I'm sorry, guys, we can't manage to answer all of them. We register all of them and then we can follow them up. And this is actually very good input for Tyler for next, let's say, content for creating. Just a
Yeah.
reminder, everybody who's buying HackMotion or has previously bought HackMotion gets access to the special course on Golf Smart Academy made by Tyler. And he starts with this presentation walking through how to understand the data and then more in detail about the drills that you were referencing.
Yeah, if you save all those questions and send them to me, maybe I can do kind of like a little Q&A that I can put on the page where we have this presentation for those who have purchased the HackMotion sensor.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
So if you didn't get your question answered, be patient. I'll try to get around to it when I get back from the trip.
Yeah, because the more you answer, the more questions are coming. So we would be basically all.
It looks like it looks like there's a question from Adam Young though.
Yeah, he's actually the next presenter. So he's raising his hand that he's ready to.
He's ready to go. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
I was all getting excited. Maybe he found something he wanted to throw at me.
Maybe I will allow him to comment on that. Okay, so Tyler,
Okay.
it was a pleasure having you, and then enjoy the PGA show.
Yeah, I'll see you at the open forum.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Bye bye.
Take care.